Brian, what thoughts do you have about the rumor that Final Fantasy XI R is still going to happen for the 20th anniversary, but it was brought back to be an in-house project versus outsourced to Nexion? And to be honest, with Final Fantasy XI getting this special website in the interviews with like everyone in the company, I'm gonna be disappointed if Final Fantasy XI doesn't get something massive with new jobs. And with that, hello and welcome everyone to Ginger Prime. My name is Brian if you're new around here, but if you're a returning subscriber, welcome back, you legend. In fact, if you've never seen this, I've actually been enjoying kind of going all natural, no beanies in this regard. So welcome to the, welcome to whatever this is. Brian, Final, I was like about to call myself Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy talks about Brian. Welcome guys, and we're going to have a good fun time with this video because this is something that I am agonizing over, and I am trying to find a way to reconcile that, to sit here and look at what I hope versus what I think is going to happen, from just lowering my expectations to ultimately the unknown, and that is, what is Final Fantasy XI? What are they going to do for their 20th anniversary? Will there be a connection to Final Fantasy XIV in some way? We obviously know the future of Final Fantasy XIV will be happening, at least the 10-year presentation, whatever that shakes out to be, on February 18th. If you guys are excited about that, we'll be doing something here on Ginger Prime and over on Twitch with Work to Game as well. So note that there's definitely something that is going to be happening in terms of sharing us about the future about Final Fantasy. But here we are, Final Fantasy XI R. Did it continue? Let's just break it down from a pure development and a contractual perspective, things that we don't know, but ultimately to help give you guys a little bit of understanding about my experience as a software engineer and what could and potentially happen. So Square Enix owns Final Fantasy XI. Nexion was working on Final Fantasy XI R in Unreal with the idea of bringing it to mobile. That gave a lot of us gamers, a lot of us Final Fantasy 11 veterans, a lot of pause, a lot of concern. Talking with others, like mobile, like obviously then especially Nexion, what could it entail? But Square Enix is paying for it, Nexion's developing it. Eventually that project was canceled. There are many reasons why. But when we look at it, who owns the code? Who owns that core code base? And by default, and I would assume, it's going to be something shared between Square Enix and Nexion. I think it's not without reason to say that Square Enix couldn't buy the work and the effort, especially with Unreal, and bring it in-house. I think they obviously have within their rights to do so, and Nexion, probably however that contract has ended up being structured, could easily sell that. They can say, yeah, of course, because then they got paid for the development and the time that they already worked on it, and then essentially they get, the handover of the code itself, and then you always could, even hire out the programmers who were working on it in the first place. Like, all of these things happen all the time behind the scenes. So in fact, I'm actually going through a code conversion and handing off from another development team right now in the real world. So it happens outside of games as well. So could Square Enix have taken it under its wing? Well, they put a lot of time into it over at Nexion. I wouldn't think that if they decided to do something like that for Final Fantasy XI, it makes sense to take the work that's already been done, unless it's just subpar, unless it's just not going to make any sense, and bring it in-house. And that's actually what I'm hoping for. Reason being, when you look at what Square Enix has got within its portfolio, and you look at how even Sony is sitting here saying PlayStation is going to have 10 live service games by 2026. Like, when you start looking at the value of what the live service game is, MMO or, MO, massively, online or multiplayer online, when you look at the value that those games bring, it makes sense to sit here and say, why are we ignoring Final Fantasy XI? It actually has a lot of value. And when you start to sit here and structure, I don't know if Square Enix is going to do it specifically, but imagine if they decided to say, here is our shared subscription fee. And that's going to cover Final Fantasy XI servers, Final Fantasy XIV servers. Like, you pay one fee, you have access to both of these games. It gives them even more staying power. Like, when you look at what World of Warcraft did with WoW and WoW Classic, imagine Final Fantasy XIV literally getting to do the same thing. Hey, you pay your one fee, guess what? You get 2 MMOs. Guess what? We've remastered Final Fantasy XI. So how does this all play with the website? How does this all work with like the interviews and the We Are Vanna deal? I think they're building up to something. Is it just an expansion built off of their old code? I don't think if they were talking about, because they've said this in the interviews, wanting like how great would it be for Final Fantasy 11 to celebrate its 100th anniversary. Like if you're looking at it from a technical perspective, if you've already invested money in Unreal, if it's been years and years, because these are big projects, how epic would it be to say, here's a whole new Final Fantasy 11 for a whole new generation. It's a numbered Final Fantasy title. They've even in these interviews, they talked about the difficulty and how 11 really wouldn't work as a single player game, taking it like Dragon Quest X offline mode in that case. And so we've seen the retail version kind of try to solve this with trusts, but in the end, at the end of it all, you still have a Final Fantasy 11 game that isn't that accessible, that has this old architecture of play online that remains to be supported. I think it just makes sense. Now, here I am building up that expectation. I am setting them up to disappoint me. And that's the thing. I'm setting my expectations at maybe an expansion, maybe based off the old, current technology. You see what they've already done with the retail version, mastery levels, level 99, like all of these things. And I'm not going to even knock them. Like, what are you going to do? Like, how do you support a player base that is relatively small and niche when you look at the like sandbox, hardcore party-based MMO? That's one of the things that's going to be really fascinating to see as we go forward with things like New World to a degree, but the Riot MMO, in which they're saying that if you want to play a single player game, there's other games out there for you. We're making a specifically multiplayer game. Whether that means parties, are required, if there's any way you can play solo, that has yet to be seen. So I'm very excited about that, just from a game design philosophy and business model thing for the future. So note that I'll be talking about it at some point. Anyway, I think essentially setting expectation that maybe they get a new job. Maybe we get an expansion. I think that sounds interesting. They've been building up some story in the game. They've continued to support the game despite every time they say, hey, we're going to slow down. But they announced years ago they're working on something big for the 20th anniversary. Something big. And that's where the gamer in me gets mad and excited at the same time, because that says, oh my gosh, what if all this is true? What if this is going to happen? Well, if it does, we all win. I think everybody wins, whether it's a shared subscription or not. Like, if they bring it back, they remastered in Unreal, like who wouldn't want to experience that? I think they're going to have to make changes. I think you can't release the game you released back in 2002, 2003 in the US in 2022, unless your business model is such that you don't need, mass appeal. In fact, that's actually one of the things that's really quite fascinating, is that when you look at MMOs, they had they blew up, especially with World of Warcraft on the global and just the visible scale. But typically MMOs were running off of 100,000 players. Like, they were just they weren't built in a way that required a huge amount of players to constantly be playing the game in order for it to be viable and sustainable. And Yoshi P himself has commented on that specifically. So all that to be said, I hope for it, but if it doesn't happen, I'm not going to be disappointed, because that's on me. They haven't told me they're remastering it, but I think they are. And I think that makes the most sense. And now, obviously, I could easily be wrong. I'm not going to sit here and say, hey, yeah, this is absolutely happening. But it feels like something is building, and it feels like something big is happening. It feels like that seems to be the most respectful way to pay tribute to Final Fantasy 11, to set it up for the next 90, 80 years. That feels like it makes the most sense, because when you're on a new platform, especially Unreal, that's just education in terms of, if I was running the development department there, hey, let's make sure we have enough developers that understand this technology, because it makes it easier for us to support it on a global scale. And then it makes it easy for us to maintain it in the long run. However, man, what could possibly change? It is a living landmine of a field that you're not going to make everybody happy with whatever they do here. And especially with the hardcore 11 players, they're probably still going to want to go play on private servers to have that really classic 2002, 3, 4, 5 experience, wherein I think if they did do an Unreal, there would be some levels of compromise, but that they do have a lot of freedom to sit here and say 11 is very sandbox, very party focused, being that we have Final Fantasy 14, which is very story focused. But who ultimately will know, and ideally will know, obviously this year. This is their 20th anniversary. Now, whether it launches this year or not, that has yet to be seen. Obviously, the last 2 years alone in game development have been pretty chaotic. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Those are my fears. That is the structure of this crazy video. Thank you so much, Icarus, for suggesting it. Sorry, it took me a little longer than a week to sit down and actually kind of put my thoughts down for you. But hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Anyway, guys, let me know. Like, I got some negative comments about the no beanie, but it is what it is. You know, the internet is the internet. Thanks for being here. If you made it all the way to the end, yeah, let me know. Let me know by saying, yeah, Final Fantasy. Oh, actually, let me know. What was your favorite Final Fantasy 11 expansion? Sound off in the comments and we can have that conversation. Anyway, guys, for Ginger Prime, thanks for watching. Hopefully you have a fantastic day. Hopefully I'll see you next time. Until then, take care.
Yeah. It's time to chill out on the couch and read some comments. That's right. You know me when it comes to Destiny. I'm off with a clan, and I'm glad you're feeling better.